You're boarding your dream cruise, bags packed perfectly, only to watch security confiscate your coffee maker, your favorite candles, and even your handheld fan. Welcome to cruising in 2025, where major lines like Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian are implementing stricter rules than ever before. What started as basic safety measures has evolved into comprehensive lifestyle restrictions that most passengers don't see coming. The cruise industry calls it protecting their brand, but critics are calling it something else entirely. Ever wonder why cruise lines suddenly care about your Bluetooth speaker? That portable music device you've been packing for years just became contraband, and Carnival's new ban isn't about keeping the peace between passengers? The real story goes deeper than noise complaints. Here's what happened during an emergency drill that changed everything. Picture the pool deck during a mandatory safety exercise. Emergency alarms blaring across the ship, crew members shouting evacuation instructions, and half the passengers completely oblivious to the chaos. They couldn't hear the announcements over dozens of personal speakers pumping out competing playlists at maximum volume. The cruise line discovered they had a life safety crisis on their hands. When seconds matter during a real emergency, passengers need to hear evacuation orders clearly and immediately. Your poolside playlist becomes a deadly distraction when the ship's communication system can't cut through the audio noise. Maritime law doesn't mess around with passenger safety requirements. Federal regulations mandate that all passengers must be able to hear emergency announcements without interference. When personal speakers block those critical messages, the cruise line faces serious legal liability. One missed evacuation order during an actual emergency could result in federal investigations, massive lawsuits, and potential criminal charges for crew members. But here's the catch. It's not just Bluetooth speakers causing problems. Those handheld clack fans that became popular on social media create their own audio chaos in crowded nightclubs and entertainment venues. When hundreds of passengers are clicking away during shows or announcements, the noise drowns out important safety information and operational instructions. The cruise lines realized they weren't dealing with party atmosphere complaints from annoyed passengers. They were looking at situations where people literally can't evacuate properly because they can't hear the instructions. Think of it like trying to follow fire drill procedures in a building where someone's jamming the intercom system. The speaker ban extends to any device that competes with ship communication systems during critical moments. Your wireless earbuds are fine because they don't broadcast sound that interferes with announcements, but anything that creates ambient noise in public areas now gets confiscated at embarkation. Even those innocent-looking portable fans with built-in speakers face restrictions. The cruise lines learn that passengers use these devices in tight spaces like elevators and stairwells, exactly where clear communication becomes essential during emergencies. When crew members can't give evacuation directions because passengers can't hear over fan noise, the entire safety system breaks down. The policy isn't about being the fun police or controlling your vacation experience. Cruise lines are preventing scenarios where confused passengers create bottlenecks during evacuations, putting everyone at risk. One passenger who doesn't hear the move to starboard instruction can block an entire evacuation route. What started as protecting the party atmosphere became a federal safety requirement that could save lives. The cruise lines chose compliance with maritime law over accommodating personal entertainment preferences. They'd rather deal with complaints about confiscated speakers than explain to federal investigators why passengers couldn't hear emergency instructions. Bottom line, this regulation protects everyone on board, including you. The acoustic environment on cruise ships needs to prioritize safety communications over personal entertainment during critical moments. Pro tip: pack good headphones instead of speakers. You'll get better sound quality for your music, and you won't have to worry about confiscation at security. Your ears will thank you, and you'll actually hear those important announcements when they matter most. Royal Caribbean banned rubber ducks in Central Park, and cruisers are calling it ridiculous. The duck hiding trend seemed harmless until maintenance crews started finding trampled plants and damaged irrigation systems every single day. What looks like innocent social media fun actually cost the cruise line thousands in landscaping repairs each sailing. Here's what most passengers don't realize about Central Park on Oasis-class ships. Those aren't fake plants designed to withstand tourist abuse. They're living ecosystems that require careful maintenance, specialized soil conditions, and precise watering schedules to survive in the middle of the ocean. Each plant represents a significant investment in creating an authentic outdoor experience at sea. Duck hunters push through delicate foliage without thinking about the damage they're causing. They step on root systems that take months to recover, disturb the precise irrigation setup that keeps everything alive, and break branches while searching for hidden prizes. The cruise line watches passengers treat their carefully maintained garden like a playground obstacle course. The real kicker? Insurance doesn't cover guest-caused damage to these specialty garden installations. Every trampled flower bed, every broken irrigation line, every damaged plant comes straight out of the cruise line's operational budget. Royal Caribbean has to budget thousands of dollars per sailing just to repair the aftermath of duck hunting adventures. Crew members now spend hours each day repairing duck hunting damage instead of maintaining the beautiful spaces passengers love. Think of it like hiring a gardener to maintain your backyard, then watching neighbors tear through your flower beds looking for hidden treasures. The maintenance team can't focus on keeping Central Park healthy when they're constantly fixing destruction. The policy extends far beyond Central Park because hidden objects create slip hazards and operational headaches throughout the ship. Pool areas become liability nightmares when passengers hide ducks near wet surfaces where people walk barefoot. Retail spaces face inventory and safety issues when customers move merchandise to hide or find rubber prizes. Housekeeping crews waste time searching cabins for abandoned ducks instead of cleaning rooms properly. Food service areas become contamination risks when ducks get hidden near dining spaces. The cruise line realized they weren't managing a fun passenger activity, they were dealing with operational chaos that affected every department. Here's the catch. Liability issues multiply when passengers get injured while duck hunting. Someone slips on a wet deck while reaching for a hidden duck, or trips over damaged landscaping, and Royal Caribbean faces potential lawsuits. The cruise line's insurance company started asking uncomfortable questions about why they allowed activities that consistently led to property damage and passenger injuries. Royal Caribbean chose protecting their signature feature over accommodating a social media trend. Central Park cost millions to install and maintain, making it one of their biggest selling points for Oasis-class ships. They decided that preserving this unique amenity was more important than letting passengers turn it into a scavenger hunt zone. The enforcement isn't about being mean to families having fun. The cruise line wants you to enjoy Central Park's beauty, take photos, and appreciate the incredible engineering that creates a living garden at sea. They just don't want you treating it like a treasure hunt that destroys the very thing you came to see. Bottom line, you can still enjoy Central Park and take amazing photos. Just don't treat it like a game zone where you can disturb plants and landscaping. Respect the space, and it stays beautiful for everyone who follows. Cruise lines aren't just confiscating marijuana. They're issuing lifetime bans and pressing federal charges. What passengers think is a minor infraction becomes a career-ending mistake when federal maritime law kicks in. That state where you bought legal edibles has zero power once you step aboard a cruise ship. Unlike state laws that might be lenient, ships operate under federal jurisdiction, where cannabis remains completely illegal. Your cruise ship becomes federal territory the moment it leaves port, and federal law doesn't recognize state marijuana legalization. Think of it like bringing controlled substances into a federal courthouse. The local laws outside don't apply inside. The Coast Guard can board any vessel in U.S. waters and conduct searches without warning, putting the entire cruise line at risk. When federal agents find cannabis on board, they don't just arrest the passenger. They investigate the cruise line's security procedures, safety protocols, and compliance systems. The ship becomes a crime scene that requires extensive documentation and inspection. One passenger's edibles can trigger federal investigations that cost cruise lines millions in legal fees and delays. The entire vessel gets held at port while federal agents conduct searches, interview crew members, and review security footage. Thousands of passengers get stranded while the cruise line deals with federal prosecutors and Coast Guard investigators. Carnival's zero tolerance isn't about being strict, it's about avoiding federal prosecution of the entire operation. When the federal government finds controlled substances on a commercial vessel, they can pursue charges against the cruise line for failing to prevent drug trafficking. The company faces potential criminal liability for every passenger who brings cannabis aboard. The lifetime ban protects the cruise line from repeat offenders who might not understand the federal implications. Think of it like a federal building revoking someone's security clearance. Once you violate federal drug laws on their property, you become a permanent liability they can't afford to risk again. Even CBD products get confiscated because testing equipment can't distinguish THC levels reliably at sea. Ship security can't run lab tests to verify that your CBD gummies contain legal levels of THC. They treat all cannabis-derived products as controlled substances to avoid federal compliance violations. Here's what happens when federal authorities get involved. The cruise line faces Coast Guard inspections, DEA investigations, and potential criminal charges for the crew members who allowed drugs aboard. Federal prosecutors can argue that the cruise line facilitated drug trafficking by failing to prevent cannabis from entering their vessel. The legal exposure goes beyond individual passengers. Federal investigators examine whether the cruise line properly trained security staff, implemented adequate screening procedures, and followed federal guidelines for controlled substance prevention. One passenger's marijuana stash becomes evidence of the cruise line's security failures. Cruise lines chose protecting their federal operating licenses over accommodating individual passenger preferences. They need federal approval to operate in U.S. waters, dock at U.S. ports, and carry U.S. passengers. Losing that federal license means losing their entire business model. The enforcement system treats cannabis violations like federal crimes because they are federal crimes. Your lifetime ban gets entered into industry databases that all major cruise lines share. Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, and Carnival all check the same system when you try to book future cruises. Here's the catch. These bans are permanent and shared between cruise lines through industry databases. Get caught with cannabis on one cruise line, and you're banned from all major cruise companies forever. The industry protects itself by preventing known federal law violators from boarding any cruise ship. Bottom line, federal waters mean federal rules, and cannabis remains federally illegal regardless of your home state's laws. Carnival's new 1 a.m. curfew for under 17 seems harsh until you see what was happening in public areas. Unsupervised teens were creating liability nightmares that threatened the cruise line's insurance coverage. What looks like strict parenting from corporate actually protects Carnival from lawsuits that could shut down their entire operation. Late-night incidents involving minors trigger automatic investigations and potential criminal charges for crew members. Think of it like being a teacher. When something happens to a minor under your watch, you face serious legal consequences even if you weren't directly involved. Crew members became legally responsible for teenage behavior they couldn't control. The real problem isn't teenage behavior. It's legal liability when minors get hurt or into trouble without proper supervision. Insurance companies don't care if teenagers are just having fun. They care about who gets sued when an unsupervised minor falls downstairs, gets alcohol poisoning, or ends up in a medical emergency at 2 a.m. Insurance companies now require documented supervision policies or they won't cover incidents involving unaccompanied minors. Your cruise ticket becomes a contract that makes Carnival responsible for your teenager's safety. When parents go to bed and leave teens wandering the ship alone, the cruise line assumes all liability for whatever happens next. The 25-year-old minimum for adults bringing minors prevents young adults from taking responsibility they can't legally handle. A 20-year-old college student can't sign legal documents, make medical decisions, or handle emergencies involving minors. When something goes wrong, that young adult has no legal authority to help, leaving Carnival holding all responsibility. Crew members were spending entire shifts managing teenage groups instead of performing their actual jobs. Security guards became babysitters, bartenders became youth counselors, and medical staff dealt with preventable teenage incidents. The cruise line realized they were paying crew members to manage problems that parents should handle. Here's what happens during a typical late-night teenage incident. A minor gets injured or causes damage while unsupervised. Carnival faces potential lawsuits from parents, medical expenses, property damage costs, and crew time dealing with the situation. The cruise line becomes liable for everything because they allowed the minor to be unsupervised in their facility. One serious incident involving an unsupervised minor can result in Coast Guard investigations and Port Authority involvement. Federal agencies treat injuries to unaccompanied minors as potential negligence cases. They investigate whether the cruise line provided adequate supervision, followed safety protocols, and protected the minor from harm. The curfew extends beyond just keeping teens in their rooms. It creates a clear legal boundary where Carnival's responsibility for unaccompanied minors ends. After 1 a.m., parents become fully responsible for their teenagers' whereabouts and behavior. The cruise line protects itself from late-night liability issues. Carnival chose protecting their operating license over accommodating family vacation flexibility. Federal regulations require cruise lines to maintain safe environments for all passengers, especially minors. The curfew demonstrates to regulators that Carnival takes minor safety seriously and has policies to prevent incidents. The policy isn't about controlling teenagers, it's about controlling legal risk. Parents who want their teens to have more freedom need to provide direct supervision after curfew hours. The cruise line won't assume parental responsibility for unsupervised minors during high-risk late-night hours. Bottom line, Carnival shifted legal responsibility back to parents where it belongs. The curfew protects the cruise line from lawsuits while forcing families to take direct responsibility for teenage supervision. Pro tip: book family-friendly cruise lines if you want more relaxed policies for teens. Different cruise lines have different approaches to minor supervision requirements. Your coffee maker, iron, and hoverboard all share one dangerous trait that cruise lines finally addressed. Lithium batteries and heating elements cause more ship fires than passengers realize, forcing comprehensive electronics bans across the industry. What seems like corporate overreach actually prevents disasters that could kill passengers trapped at sea. And one overheating device in a cabin can trigger evacuations costing hundreds of thousands in operational delays. Think of your cabin like a tiny apartment with paper-thin walls and narrow escape routes. When an electrical fire starts, it spreads fast through ventilation systems and threatens entire deck sections. The cruise line faces massive liability when passengers get injured during emergency evacuations caused by preventable electrical fires. It about thousands and Kendevkanjian by Beijikshanda and Buter and Nitonsesa. Coffee makers and irons draw massive power loads that overwhelm cabin electrical systems designed for basic needs. Ship cabins get wired for lights, phone charging, and maybe a hairdryer. When you plug in a high-powered coffee maker that pulls the same electricity as a small heater, you overload circuits that weren't built to handle that demand. The wiring overheats, insulation melts, and fires start inside walls where sprinkler systems can't reach them. Hoverboards contain lithium batteries that can explode without warning, creating toxic fires in enclosed spaces. These batteries undergo thermal runaway, a chain reaction where overheating causes more overheating until the battery literally explodes. The toxic smoke from burning lithium fills cabin corridors faster than ventilation systems can clear it. Passengers trying to evacuate through smoke-filled hallways face serious injury or death from inhaling poisonous fumes. Ham radios and satellite phones interfere with ship navigation systems, potentially causing course deviations. Modern cruise ships rely on GPS and electronic navigation that operates on specific radio frequencies. Your ham radio or satellite phone broadcasts on frequencies that can disrupt the ship's ability to communicate with Coast Guard stations or determine accurate position. When navigation systems fail, the ship becomes a floating hazard to other vessels and offshore structures. Boards. Extension cords create fire hazards when passengers overload circuits trying to charge multiple devices. You bring a power strip, plug it into an extension cord, then connect every device you own. The extension cord becomes a weak link that heats up under excessive electrical load. Passengers often run these cords under carpets or behind furniture where heat builds up undetected until the cord catches fire. The real issue is that ship electrical systems weren't designed for modern passenger electronics loads. Cruise ships get built with electrical capacity calculated for basic cabin needs, not for passengers who bring coffee makers, hair straighteners, curling irons, and multiple charging devices. The infrastructure can't handle the increased demand without creating dangerous overload conditions throughout passenger areas. Norwegian bans large batteries, emergency beacons, transformers, and laser pointers because these devices pose safety risks or interfere with ship operations. Even seemingly harmless items like travel routers get banned because they add to electrical load and can malfunction in ways that create fire hazards. Cruise lines banned entire categories of devices rather than risk catastrophic fires at sea. They realized that trying to regulate individual items was impossible when passengers kept finding new ways to overload electrical systems. The blanket bans on heating elements and high-power devices eliminate entire classes of fire risks rather than dealing with incidents after they happen. Bottom line, your cabin's electrical system can't handle modern electronics loads safely. The cruise lines chose preventing fires over accommodating passenger convenience because electrical fires at sea can become deadly disasters with nowhere to escape. Here's how to prepare. Check your cruise line's specific electronics policy before packing anything with a heating element or high power requirements. Cruise lines aren't just being greedy when they ban your homemade sandwiches, they're avoiding federal health violations. Outside food creates contamination risks that can shut down entire cruise operations under CDC regulations. What looks like corporate control over your snack choices actually protects cruise lines from investigations that destroy reputations and cost millions. One case of food poisoning from outside food can trigger CDC investigations that paralyze cruise operations. Think of your cruise ship like a floating restaurant that serves thousands of meals daily. When passengers get sick from contaminated food they brought aboard, the CDC doesn't care where the contamination started. They investigate the entire ship's food safety system, shut down dining operations, and impose sailing restrictions until they identify the source. The cruise line becomes legally responsible for any illness, even if passengers brought contaminated food on board. Your homemade sandwich becomes the cruise line's legal nightmare when other passengers get sick. Federal health investigators assume the ship's food systems caused the contamination unless proven otherwise. The cruise line faces lawsuits, regulatory penalties, and reputation damage for illnesses they didn't cause. Unsealed food items introduce pests, bacteria, and allergens that spread throughout the ship's food systems. Your open bag of chips attracts insects that multiply in food storage areas. Cross-contamination happens when crew members handle your outside food and then prepare meals for other passengers. Allergens from your personal snacks contaminate food prep surfaces, triggering severe reactions in passengers with food allergies. CDC health inspectors impose sailing restrictions if they find evidence of outside food contamination. The ship gets detained at port while investigators examine food storage areas, interview crew members, and test surfaces for contamination. Thousands of passengers miss excursions, flights home get canceled, and the cruise line pays massive compensation costs while dealing with regulatory violations. The real kicker? Insurance doesn't cover losses from passenger-introduced health violations. When outside food causes contamination that triggers CDC investigations, the cruise line absorbs all costs without insurance protection. They pay for passenger refunds, medical expenses, legal fees, and operational delays caused by contamination they didn't create. The financial exposure runs into millions per incident. MSC Cruises and other lines ban all outside food because partial restrictions create enforcement nightmares. Security staff can't distinguish safe foods from contaminated items during embarkation screening. Norwegian Cruise Line prohibits unsealed food items because open packages pose higher contamination risks than factory-sealed products. The industry learned that blanket bans prevent more problems than selective restrictions. Wine exceptions exist because alcohol kills bacteria, but even wine has quantity limits to prevent customs issues. Alcohol content makes wine safer than other outside beverages, but excessive quantities create customs violations when ships dock at international ports. The cruise lines balance passenger preferences with regulatory compliance by allowing limited wine while banning other outside drinks. Here's what happens when contamination spreads. Food prep areas get shut down, alternative dining arrangements cost thousands in emergency supplies, and passenger confidence plummets when news of contamination spreads through social media. The cruise line's health rating drops, affecting future bookings and regulatory standing with port authorities. Cruise lines chose protecting their health ratings over accommodating passenger food preferences. Health ratings determine port access, regulatory standing, and passenger confidence. A single contamination incident can damage a cruise line's reputation for years and result in sailing restrictions that affect thousands of future passengers. Bottom line, specialty dietary needs get accommodated through official channels, not smuggled snacks. Cruise lines work with passengers who have allergies, religious restrictions, or medical dietary requirements through proper advance notification systems that maintain food safety protocols. These bans aren't about controlling your vacation. They're about cruise lines protecting themselves from federal investigations, insurance losses, and operational shutdowns. When you understand the legal liability behind each restriction, the policies make perfect sense. Cruise lines would rather deal with passenger complaints than face Coast Guard investigations, CDC shutdowns, or million-dollar lawsuits from preventable incidents. Pro tip: check each cruise line's specific banned items list before you pack, because policies vary and enforcement is getting stricter every year. What's allowed on Carnival might get confiscated on Royal Caribbean. Comment Cruise Insider below if this helped you avoid a confiscation surprise on your next sailing.